Hi and welcome back. Sorry about that, got a bit of a problem with my phone storage, but I think I've got it sorted. Okay, so let's compare the second source then. Very different in terms of tone, very different in terms of words used. There are some similar things between the two sources which would help an historian to work out what was fact and what is opinion. So really useful to look at two different sources. Let's look at the origin of this source. So we've got it's written by Saladin, Saladin's secretary. So someone very close to Saladin. Whereas when we looked at this one, it was an English churchman. We don't even know at this stage whether this churchman was on the crusade himself or whether he was just someone of the church who was living in medieval Britain at the time. Okay, we also don't know how far from the actual event that this one was written. Whereas if this was Saladin's secretary, it would have been at the time. So we've got an interpretation compared to more of a contemporary source. So let's read through and see what jumps out. I'll read it through all once and then we'll go back and we'll break it down a little bit for you. Okay, so here, this King of England was courageous, energetic and daring in combat. When he arrived at Acre, the Franks let out cries of joy and the Muslims were filled with fear. The English king broke his word to the Muslim prisoners who had surrendered the city in return for their lives. If Saladin paid their ransom, they were to be freed. If he did not, they were to become slaves. When he saw that Saladin delayed payment, he secretly changed his mind. Even after he received the money, he ordered the cold-blooded slaughter of more than 3,000 men. So, very different in tone, isn't it? And lots of different things here. So let's have a look. This King of England was courageous, energetic and daring in combat. When he arrived at the Acre, the Franks, the Christians, the Crusaders, or the people who were living there at the time, let out cries of joy and the Muslims were filled with fear. Very different to what we had here. This idea alone and berserk, and he came across the Muslims almost as if by accident. Whereas here, okay, he's gone to the Acre, he's gone to that city in order to take it back for the Christians. Here, he cleared a path. So we've got this idea that he was a great warrior, but in terms of he didn't have to be. Whereas here, they know he was courageous, energetic, and daring in combat. So different ideas. This shows an element of respect, though, that the Muslims had for Richard as a warrior and as a leader. And an element of respect. They let out their cries of joy and the Muslims were filled with fear. So straight away, he didn't come across Muslims who were trying to attack him or defend the city. They were the people filled with fear. So I wonder if these were more just people who lived there at the time. And we know from previous sources we've looked at in this unit of work that there is evidence that the Christians and the Muslims or different religions lived in peace around Europe. So maybe the Muslims and the Franks here were originally living in peace. But I suppose if it let out cries of joy, then maybe the people living there wanted him to come and to lead them to take up back the city. Then we've got some of the source missing because of our dots here. And then it goes on to say, the English king broke his word to the Muslim prisoners who had surrendered the city in return for their lives. So, straight away we've got the English king. Not Christian king, not king of the Crusaders, but the English king. So how would they have seen medieval Britain then at the time, I wonder? Broke his word to the Muslim prisoners. So it wasn't Saladin maybe that didn't keep his promises. Maybe it was some on both sides. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. We don't know. Okay, Muslim prisoners who had surrendered the city in return for their lives. So these weren't fighters, these weren't warriors, they weren't a threat to the Crusaders because they surrendered in return for their lives. They thought if they surrendered, they would be allowed to live. We know, don't we, from the end of the first source, that they didn't live. If Saladin paid their ransom, they were to be freed. Now, this is a really interesting sentence because of that word ransom. Ransom is when you demand money or something in return for something, Okay, so why, if this was about God, about Christian, about Holy Lands, would they be demanding money? That goes directly against really those Christian ideals and what we believe they were fighting for, what some of the Crusaders would have believed they're fighting for. However, we also know from previous lessons and previous slides that the Crusaders were promised money and land and riches in this life and in later life in heaven. So, does this maybe make you think that maybe Richard, maybe the Crusaders weren't only doing it for that power of the church? Okay. If he did not, they would become slaves. Slavery goes against Christian beliefs, goes against those teachings of Jesus that we've talked about, okay? That idea, if you don't do what I say, then this consequence will happen. But that consequence goes against what a Christian should have really been believing at that era. When he saw that Saladin delayed payment, he secretly changed his mind. Two things in this part. Delayed payment. So he didn't not pay, he didn't refuse to pay, he didn't break his promises according to the secretary. It was just delayed. What was that due to? Was that due to weather? Was that due to having to get the money? Why do you think that might have been delayed? And then what else is really interesting in this sentence you might not have picked up? He secretly. So this fact that it's he, we're going back to this power of the king. Was there really a council that decided? Was it a group of people that had decided to execute the prisoners? Or was it really the king? And what might make somebody choose to kill that many people? Okay, think about power, think about revenge, think about the idea that maybe he needed to send a message so that no other Muslims would go against the Christians in the Holy Lands. Okay, lots of reasons why that might have happened. And secretly, so he didn't send a warning to Saladin, if you don't give me this payment, we are going to kill the prisoners. He secretly did it. So that word secret is emotional. So it's not as reliable because we know this person would have been very close to Saladin. Okay, but it is something a historian would have to look into. Even after he received the money, he ordered the cold-blooded slaughter of more than 3,000 men. So even after he received the money, so according to Saladin's secretary, the money was sent and was received, and this happened after. Whereas this source, it doesn't say anything, does it? It says he did not keep his promises, but he sent gifts and messages. I wonder what those messages were. Were they, the money's on its way, were they things like that? We don't know, do we? We'd have to try and find out more. And then we go back to that emotional language, which makes us understand the opinion of the secretary. Cold-blooded slaughter. Cold-blooded is when you do something without emotion, no empathy. Remember we looked at that image of the Muslim and the idea of dehumanizing it in order to be able to hurt Muslims, because if it's not human it doesn't matter. Okay, so the fact that it was cold-blooded, there was no emotion in the way that they killed these Muslims. They didn't think of them as fathers, as sons, as fellow human beings. And then that word slaughter. Slaughter is an unnecessary killing. Here, execution sounds like something you might have to do because somebody's done something wrong, a punishment. Here, slaughter is not a punishment. There's no need for a slaughter. And it gives you that visual idea of how many men this might have been, or how many prisoners this might have been. Okay? And then we got 3,000 men. So, from a historian's point of view, there's quite a lot in these two sources that they could put together to create an event that probably did happen. So, we have got the fact that King Richard came to the city of Acre. Okay, so here he came upon them as if by accident. Here he came. We know that King Richard was a warrior and a good fighter, because that's in both of them. Okay, we know that there was communication between Richard and Saladin. We can see that because there was some sort of promising, some sort of demands, some sort of conversation between the two leaders. So we know that definitely happened. Okay, we know that there was some sort of change of mind, that the Muslim prisoners were originally going to be safe, however then they were killed, and we know about how many prisoners were killed. So from a historian's point of view, there are things that we can take out of there, and then from a historian's point of view as well, there's opinion, there's ideas, there's contrast, there's conflict. So you would have to really think about the origin, think about the purpose, in order to work out what you think about these two leaders. Okay, now this was just a looking one and a thinking one, and if you've watched this video, then you're already doing some high level thinking. If you want to go ahead and write about it, that's absolutely fine. You can do that. Okay, so moving on. Now we're going to do something we don't do very often in Excellence, and that's to give you a set of questions that you work on. This is going to be a good way that you could have some downtime from the screen if you're lucky enough to have a printer, or you could write out some of the questions, and then you can move away from the screen and work through the sources if you have that option. Okay, now each source has got a number, so each question goes directly with that source. So when you look at the source, you know where to find the answer. You don't have to look anywhere else but the source, it tells you. All of these sources are found on those pages that we've already looked at, page 96 and 97. If you can't remember, go back to your where you find all these PowerPoints, go to the textbooks and click on the SHP one. It looks like this. Okay, so this is the SHP one, you tell because of the purple. Scroll down, now it says 96 and 97. We're not looking at the PDF pages, we're looking at the page numbers from the original book. So here we've got page 88. Okay, so you want to scroll all the way down. You should have already had a little look at these, loads of good information for you, loads of good sources that you can look at. Here you'll see here's source 20, 21, 22. They're all about Richard. Then when you go further down, source 23, source 24, source 25, all about Saladin. So that's where you're going to find those answers. Okay, so going back to our questions here. Okay, source 20, when did Richard rule and how much time did he spend in England? Why did Richard not attack Jerusalem? And what did Richard and Saladin agree? Closed questions. There is an answer that you can find, and you can retrieve that information directly into your answer. Okay, so it's not asking you really to think. Nice closed questions. When we move on, the question gets a little bit harder. So we're going to look at two sources together. Okay, these sources describe the same event. What do you agree about and what do they disagree about? Is there any evidence Richard was a hero? And why has he got the name of the lion hat? You're thinking now, so slightly more thinking. That is just the two sources we just looked at, the two that we broke down about the event. So you should have loads of ideas already for that, okay? Then we move on a little bit more, source 23. What does this word suggest about Saladin? How does it make him look? So now you're going to have to go a bit deeper. You're going to have to infer into the source and make suggestions. So you can't necessarily be right or wrong, but you need evidence to back it up. Not a PEE, you just need to say why you know. You can't just make a statement. You've got to back up why you believe that, okay? Then here we've got another one, and then down the bottom are your higher levels again. Why might some historians not trust the sources, okay? So here you're looking at reliability. What about them isn't reliable? You're going to need to look at who wrote them, when they were written, what was the purpose, think about the audience, the intended audience, and then from that work out why a historian might not trust them. And then you're going to do, why do you think Saladin's got that name? So, closed questions, answer directly from the text. We've got some inference here, and then we've got some deeper thinking here. So I'm going to stop now. The next video is going to be a breakdown of a PEE question that I'm going to do an example for you, and then you can go off and do it, because we've noticed when some of the work that you've been sending in to us that maybe PEE is something we need to do a little bit of work on. So I'm going to leave that to you now. Off you go, do the questions, and I'll speak to you later. Bye.